Hello everyone. Hello from Denver, as usual. And as I always do, I start out by taking a moment to share this video on my personal page and usually fix my collar a little. I don't actually have a mirror anywhere near where I'm starting this, so the first time I see myself is generally on camera, which is kind of funny to me. Because as I'm sure you all know, you often look a little bit different when you look at yourself on your cell phone camera than either you think you do or a mirror might appear to you. So, all right, going to go ahead and take a moment to share this. Thank you for your patience. And there we go. Okay, shared. Well, today I am talking about playtime. What I mean by that, why it's important, and how you can intentionally create that in your workplace, your company, your community, groups that you're in. So I'm going to tell you a little story and then give you 3 or 4 takeaways that hopefully you can use in your own life. If you don't know who I am, my name is Aymii, and I'm a cultural innovator. I help companies and organizations and even individuals help evolve and grow and develop healthy, exciting, fun cultures that will drive innovation, efficiency, better cohesiveness between teams, and overall make those groups and organizations more successful and attract better talent. And actually bring out the talent of people that already may be there. So that's the other thing I get very excited about, is there are often hidden talents that already exist in teams and companies and individuals that just have never been given the right set of circumstances to incubate and grow and develop them and bring them out. So one of my favorite parts about my job is getting to see teams and groups and people who are already functioning together discover new things about themselves. This month's theme has been all about rewards and motivation. So if you look back on some of my other April Facebook Live posts, you'll see they all share some sort of different insight or perspective on ways or ways not to reward and motivate different levels of, whether it be at an individual level, a group level, and so on. So that's what this theme was. And at the end of this Facebook Live, I will announce next month's general theme that I'll be going into. Today's story, playtime. Okay, before I jump into the actual story of a software company, I want to explain what I mean by play. Because, of course, we all have that vision of children out on a playground, maybe going and doing some sports, either ourselves or children. But those are just specific examples of playing. So what in general constitutes playtime? Well, typically the activity is to some extent self-chosen and self-directed. Usually the means, so the activity, the thing you're doing, is more important than the outcome, than any sort of ends. So I know sometimes sports can get a little bit gray in that area where it may seem like it's super important who wins, but ultimately if they're to be considered playtime as opposed to a job, or work time if you will, then really the experience of doing that activity, that sport, should be valued and should be emphasized more than the specific outcome. There are usually a set of structures and rules that are dictated at least partially by the players, but typically balanced by some external constraints as well. So it's usually a balance of co-creation between, and as you know, in sports, there's some rules, and I'm most familiar with hockey myself, so you win the game, you get more goals than the other team. There's referees. There's certain constraints about things you can and cannot do during the process. However, largely the players are autonomous to interact and to use strategies in the moment that they feel probably will create the best outcome. So you can see that another attribute of playtime is this balance between some structure and the people involved also co-creating those moments. There are typically feelings that playtime is removed from real life, from serious consequences. So this is an idea, again, I know sometimes for some people sports can walk a fine line there, but in general, you should be allowed to experiment and try things, and if you want to walk away, if things don't go as planned, that should kind of be no big deal. Maybe you learn something from it, you try again perhaps, but in terms of actual real life significant consequences, to be really considered part of playtime, it has to have minimal to no obvious real life consequences. Now obviously if you're playing and something major happens, or bad or good, you get a terrible injury, or you have this sudden revelation or insight, great, then maybe there are life consequences, but that's not ever the primary intent when you're going into a playful type activity. Another attribute is your mind should be active, alert, and generally non-stressed. I'm going to put a caveat on that because stress can actually be positive. So sometimes the constraint is a time constraint. Again, with sports, almost every game has a particular length or some criteria that creates an end to it. That's a good thing for all of us. Same in the workplace. I'll be using an example shortly, a story shortly about an idea called Ship It days. And part of the beauty of it is having very significant constraints that provide stress, but it's a positive stress. It's creating boundaries. So stress isn't always bad unless it's applied in the wrong manner or not managed well. So in general, the way most people think of stress, playtime doesn't really evoke that, but I did want to add that there is this other flavor of stress that is actually a positive, and I know there's sort of a saying out there, coal becomes a diamond when it's put under stress. So, I'm not a huge fan of that analogy because we're people, we don't like to be smushed, but there's kind of that sentiment to it. And finally, in my mind, the most important aspect of play, and this aspect can also occur in work, and it's a very positive thing, is a Goldilocks problem. So this means you are faced with some sort of challenge that's difficult, but not too difficult, that you should be able to make progress on. Even if you can't 100% eradicate that problem, there's some aspect of it that drives you to want to pursue it because you can feel it's going to evolve you as a person and also make progress in that area, in that problem, in that goal. A very standard example of a Goldilocks problem happens to a lot of rock climbers. When they very carefully pick their challenges, you don't want to, if you're an expert rock climber, well, climbing up a slide at the playground is probably not a huge challenge for you. There's probably a few other things. I'm not a rock climber, so I don't know all those route numbers and such, but there's probably an obvious walk up a path is not going to be a huge challenge for you, but there's probably a limit where it's too challenging and it wouldn't even be enjoyable for you to attempt it because you don't, it's just frustrating. So finding those problems that are challenging enough that they present you with needing to focus and needing to push your boundaries and your abilities a little, but you still have a very real chance of at least making progress, if not achieving them. Those are the Goldilocks problems, and those are the things that really grab us and interest us and get us to grow and to stay engaged. Quick stat, in the United States, more than 50% of our employees are typically not engaged at work. They just kind of check out. The work they're doing is not incredibly meaningful or driving them or helping them grow as people. And of those 50%, nearly 20% are actively disengaged, checking out, doing other things at work, browsing Reddit, who knows. So if you think about the cost of all this to the general U.S. in business community and lost productivity, it's about $300 billion a year. So, I mean, that's larger than the gross domestic product of Singapore or Portugal or Israel. So this is a huge concern for most companies. If you can have active, engaging, intrinsically motivated people who are challenged in this Goldilocks zone, that can be an incredible change to your bottom line. So now the story. There's a company, and they develop software. And they were fairly successful developing mostly software to help other companies manage software development. So Atlassian is the name of the company. And they have produced some great tools. Jira is one that if you're a developer you may have heard of. But similar to Atlassian, you look at some of the things like Google Labs and the constant innovations that Google comes up with. Look at 3M. They have Post-it notes. They have all kinds of other innovations. Most people have heard of Post-it notes. But these companies weren't always this way. This is where they are now, and they've been incredibly successful. But there was a time, and I'm going to specifically talk about Atlassian, where yes, they were able to get their deliverables done, but they weren't really a standout company in terms of what they were producing. And then they decided to implement a practice called Ship It Day. And this is something I think all of us can consider and then potentially morph to be something that could be useful in our own lives. Once a quarter, they give everyone 24 hours. So here's where having that bounded, you have some constraints, to work on anything that excites and interests them. So, but it can't be their normal job. It can't just be fixing their bugs. So it could be nothing related to software or technology. It may be, hey, I really hate these light bulbs in the conference rooms. They're really harsh or they're energy inefficient. And I want to find 2 or 3 other people to help me work on this project to replace all the light bulbs in the conference room in the conference rooms in these 24 hours. It could be this new tool came out that I've been wanting to get my hands on and play with, but I don't really have any use for it currently in my projects that I'm working on, but I know this guy Dave over in marketing who knows this tool well, and I would love to brainstorm with him, and the two of us together can come up with some small project that would be fun to develop using maybe it's a new graphic design tool or virtual reality or augmented reality. So the idea being that not only do you get to pick something just for the hell of it that interests you to play with, but you also are picking whom you are interacting with during that playtime. And that's very important, is people working in self-defined, self-organized teams. And the fact that you do this once a quarter means, hey, if that person you were interested in working with isn't available today, no big deal. Check in with them. Maybe 3 months from now, you guys can start talking a little bit ahead of time and plan to work on something together. So it's not, so this isn't meant to be a difficult process where, this person isn't available. Oh my God, what am I going to do now? No biggie. Check in with them again next time. So that's another idea about the playtime. Remember, the real life consequences aren't meant to be significant. So if you've been trying to work with this person and it's a huge deal, maybe then you need to adjust how that playtime mechanic works of how you find that person that you're going to team up with and who they are. So you get the idea. They would create these teams. They would work on something that was unrelated to their job, that was defined by themselves, and people are pretty darn good at identifying their Goldilocks problem areas, something that pulls them in, they're curious about, they want to learn more. There's always that intrinsic idea of learning to these Goldilocks problems that fascinate you. And they would work for 24 hours on these ship it, because the idea being, hey, at the end of 24 hours, it's off, it's done. You're leaving it behind, or if it is great and you love it, then there's an opportunity to share it with others at the end and see, is this worth pursuing in a longer term? But you go into it with the idea that after 24 hours, whatever this thing is, that you've just had fun, you've met some new people, there's maybe some snacks, some beers, you've enjoyed yourself for 24 hours, and you may be just sending this off, throwing the bird out of the nest, and and so that's where this ship it title came from, was that it's going to sort of like FedEx, you're going to ship it out and it's on its way. So they would play with someone they chose and work on something for 24 hours that they enjoyed. And some of the greatest innovations for Atlassian came out of these, and they do this once a quarter, these 24-hour sprints, Playtime. And then they would go home, and they would actually stay at the office and work on these for 24 hours. Of course, take some breaks, eat, but that's how they chose to do it, not necessarily that this is the prescription. And at the end of the 24 hours, everyone comes back together and presents whatever the heck they've done for 24 hours. It could be a humorous presentation, it could be something they're very excited about and they're interested in having people take it to the next level. And they can decide as a team or as an individual, we don't really feel like showing you. It's just not something we thought, it didn't go where we thought, no big deal. You don't have to share either. So there's that, you have an option to kind of fail out, to quit. The consequences are minimal. And that turned out to be an incredible tactic and tool for Atlassian. It brought them innovation. There goes a fire truck going by, so my apologies if it's obnoxious in the background. Incredible new levels of innovation, less turnover, more energy, more productivity, more creativity. There's a concept called Presenteeism, where people, they show up at work, but they're not really present. It's sort of absenteeism, but you're there. And, oh boy. Here comes, one second there. There goes Denver's finest. So we reduced presenteeism, and one of the coolest things about allowing people to self-choose and self-organize their teams was they had so much more cohesiveness amongst the company, because people knew people in other departments they otherwise may not have had much interaction with, and it formed new bonds, and not just personal bonds, but new cross-functional collaborations that allowed people to attack problems and solve them in ways that maybe would never have occurred had they not had these connections outside of their own department. So if you're interested, Google Atlassian Ship It Days and learn more about their implementation, their process, and how that worked for them. But it's kind of a neat concept. You can just take that general information and see if there's some way in your life and in your organization that you could take work or a problem you're struggling with and turn it into play. And here's the top 3 takeaways for you in how you might be able to do that. You should, or whomever is going to be having playtime, should be working in self-organized teams. Anytime you have a chance to define your own team rather than working in an inherited team, you or the people in the team will be more satisfied, more creative, more productive, and there are numerous scientific studies to back that up. So the opportunity to self-organize and use team structure to meet people is invaluable. The other thing that defines successful playtime and successful teams and projects is when goals are clear. So that's where, in Atlassian's example, the team chose whatever they wanted to work on, and the goal was, let's work on this for 24 hours and learn as much as possible, or let's use it to create some sort of little deliverable. But the goal was clear for the team, even if that goal was exploratory. The feedback is immediate. So they get 24 hours, they get feedback from their team, and then they get their coworkers to give them whatever feedback is meaningful and appropriate in that context. And the challenge is not too easy or too hard. That's where that Goldilocks problem comes in. So that's the kind of the second. And then the third piece of making a successful play out of work is the desire for intellectual challenge and mastery. So if you look back a few weeks, I talked about autonomy, mastery, and purpose as being the three intrinsic drivers. So this being an intellectual challenge, and by the way, and if you're trying to assess an employee or somebody you're working with, that person's desire for intellectual challenge and intellectual growth is the single best predictor of their productivity. Because if you can create an environment, a playtime for them, and they have that inherent desire, which most of us do, and it can be fostered, then that will truly be what gauges how successful they are. So by creating this playtime, you're allowing employees, coworkers, team members, whomever, to define and create their own new domains for mastery. There may be nothing in their day-to-day lives that is really sparking them right now, so give them a chance to tell you what they think would spark that creativity and that inherent desire for mastery. So those are the takeaways from the Atlassian story and some deeper concepts of what makes something play and playful and intrinsically engaging. Next week, I'm not going to be here. I'm going to be at a conference in New Orleans, which I'm super excited about, the Collision Conference. So I'm not going to do my Facebook Live next week unless it just works out that I can pop on and say hello from New Orleans. I might try to do that at some unpredictable time if the time seems right, but I'll be back the following week. And the following week will be into the month of May. My topics for the month of May are all going to be around power, leadership, and strength. So whole new set of topic area. If any of this interests you, or if you've got something on your mind and you want to discuss other topics that help evolve and create group culture, I would love to hear from you. I'll put my chat link in the comments of this video. And I specialize in cultural innovation and helping companies elevate and create cultures to produce excellence. I'd love to hear from you, and thank you for joining me. I hope to see you again in a couple weeks.